Ymedia.
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 Stay tuned with Ymedia.
Ymedia is a media company.
Hello and welcome back to Ymedia Newsroom. I'm Ramona Singh, and we're talking about the tariffs, the retaliatory tariffs that now Ottawa has placed on American goods. If you're wondering, well, which products apply, which ones don't, what does this mean for the shoppers? Well, the burden really falls on the retailers right now. If you think about it, they're the ones who have to determine which inventory is legally American origin. What is American origin? It's the country of origin, which has to be American origin, where the product is manufactured or significantly transformed, and then recalculate the costs, and this is the retailers, and decide whether to increase prices. Now, when it comes to smaller companies, they may lack the purchase power to switch suppliers quickly, right? So for retailers, they have to see, well, we were importing from the United States. These are American made, American origin products. And how quickly do you change that up after you calculate the cost of now what are the duties that have to be paid on it? And so this 2 weeks it's quite a lot of work for these Canadian businesses that have to go through that. And then, for example, when it comes to construction and manufacturing, well, the tariffs on steel, aluminum, tools, wiring, and machinery can also raise project costs that even when the finished product is made in Canada, it's going to impact the end consumer. So these are all the things that we're looking ahead to a time where things are going to be more expensive and businesses have to really step it up to figure this out for consumers, and consumers have to really take a look at their pocketbooks to see if they can absorb some of these costs that these businesses are going to definitely pass on to the customers. And then there's farmers, of course, food. If you want food, we need to have the farmers, and that industry is quite critical when it comes to right now, like diesel, right, prices to be able to farm. There's fertilizer, agriculture equipment, and that's part of the entire thing where it comes to when it comes to agriculture equipment and replacement parts, they can also be highly specialized. So the farmers may have a few practical alternatives to established American suppliers, and then therefore the costs are going to be there. And then of course appliances, large appliances are expensive and they're difficult to source on a very short notice. So when you have a 25% border charge, this is the tariff, it could essentially significantly affect replacement costs, particularly for products that are manufactured in the United States plants. And so I suggest go to the website canada.ca, and I'll tell you exactly what it is. It's canada.ca/en/department dash finance. If you just even do a Google search to be able to find that, you'll be able to see all the items and what the tariff price is on it. And technology, of course, that's another one. With many electronics, they have global supply chains. That's true. And when it comes to the customer and the consumer effect, it's going to depend on which models legally qualify as American goods and whether the distributors reroute imports through non-US product centers. And that's going to be another critical thing to figure out. And then there's also exemption and relief. So Canada has maintained a tariff remission process for exceptional cases, which include situations where a required input cannot be sourced in Canada. So there's just no way. And so therefore it can't be competitive, or there's no reasonable non-US supplier that exists, or the tariff would cause severe harm to the Canadian economy. And a business, or another reason would be a business depends on the specialized American components. So this remission is not automatic. Companies must apply and demonstrate why relief is necessary. And to know more about this, they can go to canada.ca/en department dash finance, and then just go through it. It's labeled as process for requesting remission on tariffs that apply on certain goods from the United States. So again, highly advisable. You got to go to the government website to figure out how to do this to get a remission, and also before that, find out what the tariff percentage is. Is it 50, 25, or 15% on specific goods? And then there's a bigger question, what customers should do, right? So this is something that immediately in our minds, we think, let's go panic shop, right? Before September 8th, let's go buy all the goods we need before we have to pay the 50%, 25%, or 15% tariff on whatever the product that those tariff percentages apply on. So now part of that is, do you panic buy? And now customers are considering a major purchase can also, and I'm talking about major purchases, so not everyday goods, then whether it's an appliance, for example, right, which is part of that, it's important to check if the product's country of origin is the United States, and then also asking the sales rep, right, whether the existing inventory arrived before September 8th. So that's important. I don't know. I don't even know if a sales rep would know that, but hopefully, this is something that we can inquire from the company that is selling the goods, that if it was imported prior to the September 8th, then it should not have that tariff on these big purchases, right? Like we're talking about, let's say an appliance. And then, of course, the bigger step here is comparing Canadian made products, if there is a comparable one, what the price is. And then there's alternatives, right? Does the same product come from Europe, Mexico, Asia, alternatives? And then there's also getting, these quotes before the tariff dates, to be able to figure this out. And of course, there's also avoiding consuming every American branded product that is affected. And that's another thing, right? If we decide to just, let's say, ignore and like avoid any American product, then it might be an American product, but the country of origin is not America, for example, because it was manufactured in Asia, for example. And then there's also keeping an eye on retailers who are using tariffs to just justify increased on non-tariffed goods. And that's always been the case where, there's been a lot of accusations at grocery stores that they're keeping the prices elevated when it's not necessary. Or it's also an accusation made of, gas stations, by keeping gas prices high because of the conflict with Iran and the United States. So this is a time where things, could rapidly become a little bit confusing and chaotic, but this onus will be on the retailers as well. And of course, but when it comes to the Canadian government, they also have these remission decisions to make. So a company may apply for remission to be exempt from these tariffs of the American products that they're going to import. But then the ultimate choice is up to the Canadian government. And if there's going to be, if you can show that there's no other substitution, and if you fall under those criterias. Now, so you're wondering, why is this happening? What made, what brought us into this scenario? And really, it's the Canada-US trade negotiations that collapsed, right? They collapsed last Friday, late night. And that was after two governments, the United States and the Canadian government, failed to agree on the final terms of the deal. So among that, there were disputes that were reported that demanded involving Canadian digital and cultural policies. So French language being it's the official second language of Canada, and also required also affecting the promotion of Canadian and French language content by American streaming platforms. That was also another contentious issue. And then there was, if you recall, this negotiations were because President Trump had said that he's going to impose the 50% tariffs on approximately $28 billion on Canadian exports. And so the negotiations were taking place to be able to avoid that, which then it fell apart. And now President Trump has said that he is threatening to raise the duties on Canadian cars, trucks, and automotive parts to 50% beginning January 1st, 2027. So then that's why you have Ottawa's response that's there to essentially impose this equivalent economic cost on tariffs. That's why it's called retaliatory tariffs to pressure American industries and political constituencies to reach out to the president and his administration. Now, what the tariffs mean for Canadians, just big picture is that essentially Canadian importers will generally pay tariffs when American products enter Canada. American origin of country being America in terms of where it was manufactured. Now, those companies may absorb some of those costs, which suppliers or maybe either switch suppliers or maybe pass down the expense to the customers. And so, therefore, the potential consequences actually could be higher prices for certain appliances, electronics, clothing, and seafood. And again, the itemized list of items are on Canada.ca. And of course, this is going to affect the supply chains that could change their retailers to seek maybe Canadian or non-US alternatives, right? So just because a Canadian company's manufacturing of goods, then they need to connect to distributors, and those distributors connect to retailers, right? So it's not always the case where the Canadian retail company is in direct contact with the Canadian manufacturer. In this case, they're usually buying from a distributor who is able to carry goods from many manufacturers, right? That's called the distribution networks and supply chains, right? So therefore, now those middle companies that are purchasing from the manufacturer and selling to retail or wholesale, they're the ones who are going to have to also look first, see these products, are they origin of country America, and then divert that, right, to still also stay in business. So it's a chain. It's not always just direct, right? This is that's why it's called the supply chain, and that's why you hear the terms supply chain disruptions, right? So any component of that supply chain that gets disrupted, of course, then a chain is like, think about your necklace. It's a chain, right? And then and when one component doesn't work, then the whole thing gets affected. And that's part of that where what do these distributors do? They just increase the costs until they figure it out. And so they're not selling at a loss when it comes to figuring out, is this origin of country the United States? And so that's a huge thing. That's a huge thing that's going to take place. And also, the greater demand on Canadian made products, that's going to be another thing where perhaps these supply chains will want to push that. These distribution networks will try to push that forward. And then it's up to the retailers to really let Canadians know when they're in a retail store what is branded Canadian, right? Whether it's made in Canada brand or there's going to be shelves for just Canadian products. It's a whole new way of consuming things, and that's where things are headed. Now, the alternative, which we talked about in quite detail, but just as a refresher, what are the tariffs that will impact the United States, right? So the latest US tariffs on Canadian goods, it'll cover a range of Canadian products, right? And this is 50%. So dairy products, milk and honey, smartphones, electronics, beer, wine, whiskey, vodka, hockey equipment, clothing, gloves, fishing rods, Christmas decorations, household and consumer products. Now, what's also important is Canadian exports also include oil, electricity, and potash, and they're reportedly exempt. That which indicates that Washington wants to avoid an immediate surge in American energy and agricultural costs. So they picked the items that the ones I mentioned and not the necessary ones, which is the potash, Canadian oil, Canadian energy, which they need, which this is a midterm year. There's the midterm elections in November. So this adds up, right? Because it's already gas prices have already gone through the roof because of the conflict with Iran, and this continues. And so this is what's proposed right now. The American tariffs have been added since Saturday, just a few days ago, and now the Canadian ones will be added. Will start on September 8th. And this is quite significant because um, many things could take place. Now, there is some speculation that perhaps this won't go ahead, that they'll have maybe the both sides will come to the table and agree to stopping this trade war. And that's the bluff, right? That's the bluff that Prime Minister Mark Carney may be calling out on President Trump. Is he really going to go ahead with this? You know the term, Trump U-turns on things, so they call it like taco, right? That Trump's going to pull a taco, meaning U-turn on everything that he announces, and then he sees the markets react, and then he does a U-turn. So they're saying Trump may taco on this. So that's to be seen before September 8th. Will this go ahead? But when you really take a look at, what is really taking place is you have, some of these things on like the 50% tariff on Canadian goods, and then you have 50%, 25%, 15% on American goods. It really impacts this integrated manufacturing supply chain with the United States. You have over $3 billion that crosses in terms of value of goods across the border of the United States and Canada every 24 hours. This is, we're so integrated that it just shocks the mind to know that two countries would be at a tariff war. And really, I don't think Canadians are blaming the Canadian Ottawa, really the Canadian Parliament, our government, because we've seen now how President Trump operates, and to what Prime Minister Carney said, it's like as if the deal was, signed in pencil, meaning you could erase it any moment, that you cannot rely on America to make good on what their agreements are. And Kuzma is a perfect example of that. If you recall, the first term, President Trump got rid of NAFTA, and then Kuzma was signed in 2020, and then it had the mark of the 6-year review, and the 6-year review came on July 1st of 2026. And he said, nope, I don't want Kuzma. And he's the one who created Kuzma and signed Kuzma. And so and that's another thing. With this collapse of negotiations, what is the biggest impact on Kuzma? Kuzma is now on an annual review. What does this mean if this trade war explodes? Then what happens on this trilateral trade deal, which is worth trillions of dollars between Canada, US, and Mexico? That's really the unresolved question that remains. And this is after Prime Minister Mark Carney had said that Washington changed its demands at the last minute and asked too much and offered too little. And he described the final American terms as unfair, uneconomic, and unreliable. And then you have the American version of things, that they're saying that Trade Representative Jameson Greer says that Canada reversed earlier commitments and to decline to finalize terms that were already negotiated. So really, both sides are blaming each other. But the average person who wasn't in the room, in the negotiations room, who do they really believe? Do they believe the Canadian Prime Minister, or do they believe the American president, right? I think we don't have to ask too far to know that probably Canadians believe the Canadian Prime Minister about what took place, about the last minute changes that were what the Prime Minister calls, and I'm going to say, unfair, uneconomic, and unreliable, because we've seen a lot of things shift between what the president says. He contradicts himself. He changes his mind. There's a Trump taco that takes place, which is the U-turn on his decisions and his announcements. And then the broader perspective that perhaps Howard Lutnick did come last minute, change things up, that derailed Jameson Greer's negotiations that were taking place weeks on end. And the prime minister saying that the Americans were not on the same page about what they wanted to do. Meanwhile, the Canadians were all on the same page, had the same talking points, had the same agreement on what was really at the value of these negotiations. So that's another important thing. And so really the people, which is most of us who are not in the room, who do we believe, right? When both sides are blaming each other. So that's very critical. And another thing where you have the Prime Minister really stand up for the culture of Canada when it comes to the Canadian French language programming and Quebec's French language protections, and to say that that's very critical. The timing could not be more perfect for the prime minister. There's a by-election August 30th. Quebec is one of the seats. How is that going to do when you have the Liberals, which was a conservative seat, if you recall? The prime minister, he appointed that conservative MP to become a senator, which is a 25-year term, and therefore it became vacant, and therefore you can have a by-election. So what do you do in a Quebec seat that was formerly a conservative seat, that where you have liberals, conservatives, and the Bloc Québécois competing for that seat? And now you have the prime minister who said no to the Americans because of French language rights. The timing of it is also very crucial. The walkout when he did it, and the last minute saying we're not going to make more concessions that impact the Canadian culture, Canadian identity, and French language rights. And look at that, 5 days from now, there's a by-election. So we know the polls. The polls have been coming, and Canadians overwhelmingly were saying that they don't want Ottawa to make more concessions. So this is going to be very interesting by elections to be able to watch on August 30th with three ridings, and the Quebec one is a contentious one because you have a three-way split between conservatives, liberals, and the Bloc. And so, this could be something that could be a win for the prime minister to have another liberal MP there to add on to his majority status. So that's very critical. And then, of course, they mentioned, okay, we're going to add retaliatory tariffs, but at the same time, we're going to announce the $7.5 billion support package. This is an assistance package to prevent Canadian businesses from collapsing and having sudden loss. And that's very critical. And also, this is the businesses that export into the United States. So the Ottawa said essentially the $7.5 billion package is to make sure the measures are to include easier employment insurance access for workers whose hours or jobs are going to be affected because of these tariffs, loans and credit support for tariff exposed companies, as well as financing to help businesses find new export markets, and of course, a possible assistance for farmers and manufacturers that, have specialized components that come from America, origin of country America, and or they export into America, and now there's a 50% tariff on it, and also support for companies adapting when it comes to production or supply chains. And then there's also the loans that can protect cash flow as well as also create the debt financing. So there's also grants, wage support, as well as direct tariff relief that may ultimately matter more for businesses facing prolonged disruptions that can't just quickly find new destinations to sell to, or to find new vendors right away. So this is something that we're going to be watching of what will take place on these also September 8th, 700 products, and what this means. Could the both sides go for negotiations? Could this be canceled? Could this really start? These are the things that we're going to be watching. And of course, we have the Premier of Alberta, Danielle Smith, who's also saying that she's warning that Canada's retaliation could hurt Alberta's farmers. And so she's saying that, although she thinks that Canada was justified in rejecting Washington's last minute trade demands, she has said that this is untenable, that she's warning Ottawa's retaliatory tariffs will impose additional costs on Canadian farmers and businesses and consumers. She's also saying that she's concerned about tariffs on American agriculture machinery and industry inputs, and she argues that Canada should return to negotiations quickly and pursue a tariff-free relationship instead of celebrating a retaliation. This is after the Prime Minister said they will go back to the table if the Americans change their attitude. So some of this here is that there's $1.5 billion of Alberta's trade is reportedly exposed to the newest US tariffs. And Alberta's total annual trade with the United States is approximately $188 billion. So that's why the Premier of Alberta is saying that, hey, get back to the table and please negotiate, because that's a substantial amount. Can you imagine? $188 billion is what is Alberta's total annual trade with the United States. Mind you, the United States is not adding a tariff on Canada oil, Alberta oil, potash, electricity. So she is saying that, this is on when it comes to agriculture, it's going to expose the Albertan farmers. And so that's this is something that she's saying, please go back to the table. But she's also welcoming Ottawa's $7.5 billion support package, saying that this is something that will be necessary for Albertans to be able to get through this tough time, and what the farmers are going to be going through when it comes to how the farmers rely on American-made products such as tractors and combines, replacement parts, irrigation systems, food processing machinery, livestock, and agriculture equipment. So those are things that Canada is heavily reliant on when it comes to American products. And when it comes to energy, you have Alberta oil that has not been included in the latest US round of tariffs, but it's also reflecting the importance of Canadian crude to American refineries. And so Premier Smith wants Alberta to sell more energy to the United States and develop additional export routes elsewhere, which is to Asia, right? So that's the pipeline that goes from Alberta to the coast of British Columbia to get access to the Pacific Ocean to export to the Asian market. So that's all a lot of what is taking place right now. And hey, I think these politicians are working now overtime to be able to deal with some of these things. But when it comes to how the premiers are responding, you have Ontario Doug Ford. He says that everything should be considered, including electricity and critical minerals leverage. Now, if you saw this coverage, there was insults exchanged between Premier Ford and President Trump. And so we have a clip of it when Premier Ford was doing a press conference and reporters asked him about what he thinks about what the president has said about him personally. Take a look.
You sound a little more subdued than you did this morning on the radio when you said Donald Trump could kiss your ass. Did the Prime Minister tell you to ask you to tone it down a bit?
No, he didn't. I'm not going to comment, but he wasn't against that. And I have a lot of real estate on my ass, so he has a lot of room to kiss my ass. So
Well done.
I just do. I'm a big dude. What can I say?
Premier Sean Jefford, CBC News. I know you haven't had an opportunity to see this, but we were just looking at a very fresh post here from President Trump on Truth Social, taking aim at you personally, taking shots at you, suggesting you should fall in line, and that you are a flunky of the Prime Minister. Do you want to respond to these shots? What would you say to the president?
No, I don't respond to a dictator like President Trump, a bully like President Trump. As I said before, he's the type of guy in school that would take your lunch money one day, take your toque off your head the next day, and then steal your running shoes. But I'm not going to take any advice off a guy that's the king of bankruptcies. And he's actually tariffing his own people, taxing his own people. And I'm going to make sure I communicate through the U.S. media. I'm going to be reaching out to every single governor, every single senator, and every single congressperson. And when it comes to the midterms, I have a message to the Americans. Don't vote in a person that's going to kill your jobs. He ran on creating more jobs. Last time I checked, jobs went down in the U.S. and Ontario created more jobs. He ran on reducing the cost of living. Last time I checked, food's more expensive down there. Homes are more expensive. And the reason homes are more expensive because he has a tariff on our lumber, which 33% of all homes that are built in the U.S. use Canadian lumber. So I'm not going to take lessons off President Trump. He's the last guy that I would take any lessons off. And it's about Team Canada. We'll see how this goes, but he wants to put pain on Canadians. We'll leverage every bit of pain we possibly can on Americans. And you know what I feel bad for? I've always said I love the American people. I still stand by that statement because there's a lot of people in the U.S. that are calling me saying, way to go, keep going. You know, your own people, President Trump, don't even like you. And they're going to speak loud and clear when it comes to the midterms. And if I was allowed to, I'd be down there door knocking.
Okay, I was just wondering, you sound a little...
Yeah, there you go. And there's another part to it where the reporter reads the Truth Social post by the president, and we're going to get that up for you as well. And you'll see that Premier Ford responds to it, and so that's very important for us to be able to show you that as well. We'll pull that up for you, where you have the tweet that's not tweet, sorry, the Truth Social post. Actually, we do have the Truth Social post. I can read it to you until we find that clip of how the premier responds to President Trump. This is really important to be able to see what's taking place here, because this is so critical on so many levels on how this fight has taken over between the different levels of government. So if we can just put up the Truth Social post by the president, and I can read it. And then we had one of the reporters read it out to Premier Ford. And for that, well, Premier Ford responded to it. And then we can show you the clip on what that is. And we can go from there, where you have, Premier Ford essentially call the president a loser. What we can do is we can take a quick break. We'll come back and we'll show you some of those scenes. Okay, here we have it. If we can turn it up.
I'm just not going to take the bait. This guy's a loser. He's going to be a loser, and simple as that. We're going to fight with everything we have. And you know something? I have more courage, more brains in my baby toe than he has in his whole body. So there you go.
What we can do is, if you do have it, this is if you can put up the Truth Social post by President Trump, which is targeting Premier Ford, and then that was Premier Ford's response. So if we have it, let's put it on. If not, we'll go to a quick break and we'll be back. So let me know.